Welcome to Equitable Minds, a monthly podcast focusing on pertinent issues in the U.S. educational system and our society today. We bring to attention concerns in areas such as educational leadership, school and community, innovation in education, research to practice, and social and cultural challenges in schools. We invite experts, educators, and community members to discuss challenges and present solutions. I'm your host, Dr. Floyd Beecham, Bennett Professor of Urban School Leadership at Lehigh University. Welcome to another episode of Equitable Minds. My name is Dr. Floyd Beecham, and I'm here with my co-host, my graduate assistant, Yulitza Corsino Davis. We are thrilled, absolutely thrilled today to welcome Dr. James Wright. Dr. Wright is an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership at San Diego State University. His research analyzes various ways in which race and culture shape educational policy. In addition, he looks at contemporary educational practices informed by school policies as impacted by historically racialized inequities that have become school norms. Dr. Wright recently published a new book titled Heirs of the Great Migration: How the Past Became the Future, a narrative biography based on his family's migration from the Jim Crow era sharecropping in North Carolina to manufacturing jobs in the industrial Northeast, and his personal journey of overcoming many obstacles to succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, students in ed leadership, the general public, we want to extend a warm welcome to Dr. James Manny Wright at this particular time.
Yay! Welcome, Dr. Wright.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Now, in your time, you've done a great many things. Can you talk a little bit about your background for our listeners?
So, my background. So I grew up I was born and raised in the Northeast in a city called Waterbury, Connecticut. A bedroom town of New York City, maybe, 50 minute drive, 60-minute drive from New York City. A very interesting town in a sense, or unique town in a lot of ways, because it is, and I learned this over my travels and just over a period of living, that it's a very diverse city, a very diverse town with so many different ethnicities and races and cultural backgrounds, all sort of meshed into this really, relatively small space. And it was unique in a lot of ways for that reason. And I think, a lot of the ethnic diversity, a lot of us got along. Like, so you had, it wasn't as segregated as I came to know other places as I got older. And I'm not trying to suggest that it was some utopia, because it wasn't. We had our issues. But just in terms of like, as I got older and I started to travel and visit other places, I realized that Waterbury was very unique in a lot of ways, particularly around that. So, but what also is interesting about Waterbury is because it's not known. No one knows. Many people don't know anything or much of anything about the city nowadays. But historically, it was the place to be. It was the place to go. If you could migrate, if you could land a job in Waterbury in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, that was the place to go. So like, and there was of course, all of this is before my time. But so there was a 1985 article in the New York Times by a New York Times writer named James Brooks. And he wrote that Waterbury was, quote, the 19th century version of Silicon Valley, meaning that, during the Industrial Revolution, the industrial period, Waterbury was a draw. People wanted to come there because it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, brass manufacturing place on the planet, and a lot of other industries were there as well. And so they were drawing people from the Caribbean islands, from across the South, across Eastern Europe, across different places. And so, this is why. And so, but, so as the industrialization came, which is, I'm a product of deindustrialization. I come of
Mhm.
age sort of at the peak of deindustrialization. All of that heyday and all of that glory is gone.
Mhm.
And so, for me, I'm growing up looking at these massive factories that are just closed and abandoned, and and it's like they're just eyesores. The city is clearly divested from our communities, and and crack cocaine is on the rise. So, that's just a little bit about my background, where in terms of like, geographically where I come from, but also, some of the, I guess, highlights of what I would say is that, or rather, one of the things I'm really proud of is I was a high school basketball player on a
Mhm.
on a really, I guess, well-known high school basketball team in the state, with some very, legendary players that came from this particular school and the coach. And I was all-state point guard,
Mhm.
scored over 1,000 points. Um, state, like I said, all-state, league and city champion, um, ranked very high in the state. So, these are things I'm really proud of, in terms of, where I come from. Um, I also was, I was an aspiring or aspired to be hip hop artist. Hip hop
Mhm.
basically educated me. Like
Mhm.
my education, my introduction to critical, what we would call in the academy, critical analysis or critical theory.
Mhm.
My engagement or introduction to it was through hip hop. I learned about, I learned about Black history. I learned about African history. I learned about all these cues were given to me through hip hop. So I learned about, great Black leaders, and throughout the diaspora, through people like Chuck D from Public
Mhm.
Enemy, KRS-One, and Poor Righteous Teachers, and X-Clan, and Brand Nubian, and man, I could go on and on. Jungle
Mhm.
Brothers, the whole. So, so this was Gangstar. So this music, at like the most pivotal time of my life, I essentially grew up with hip hop music, right? So, and this was, it was, and it was informing me, and it was shaping me. And the kind of music at that time was very much about, you know, uh, it was broad, so
Mhm.
it was not to put it in a box, but a lot of it, the one that I was the versions that I was most intrigued by were the versions that dealt with like the social political naming of what was happening in our communities, and like, the resistance to the tropes that were, placed on us as, as Black men, folks from Black communities, Black people in general, the music that was resistant to that, and breaking out of those stereotypes and those boxes of who we were, and and sort of naming and defining and describing who we were. I was all for it.
Mhm.
So this is what raised me. So obviously, as I got older, and I'm speaking in hindsight, like school didn't necessarily uh um really do it for me, because a lot of what school had to offer didn't sit well with me, and a lot of what the hip hop artists and the hip hop had to offer just fit. It was right, and so I tried my hand at it, and has some successes, and I met a lot of different people from throughout the industry, and some friends and some friendships and whatever, and like basketball, I decided to move away from that. um,
Mhm.
but I did meet a lot of really good people, and I really did see a really plausible opportunity to explore it, and I sort of shut the door on it myself.
Mhm.
um, there's a lot of reasons for that, but we can or not get into that. But I think I talk about it in the book. So, but also, and then eventually, just fast forward, and I eventually wound up in Egypt, in Cairo, um, working as a school administrator, but really just wanting to get away from so much of the trauma that I had
Mm.
um, succumbed to, as a young kid, growing up in the environments and my involvement in a lot of what I was involved in. And then, uh, wanting to, sort of move away from some of the bad choices I made, in Egypt. Going there would definitely provided me with a safe space to kind of reflect and heal and think and recalibrate.
Mm.
I
Dr.
did.
Wright, what was that like being a black man from America going over to Egypt?
You know what? It's an interesting question because it's another thing that's not really talked about. Like there were a lot of us there. There were a lot of expats, from the U.S. in Cairo where I was. So like Dr. Khalifa, for example, that's how I met him.
Mm.
That's where our paths crossed. We had some mutual friends that were there, and our paths crossed, and so like him, but there were a lot of us, a lot of African Americans, many primarily those who had accepted Islam and decided that they wanted to go somewhere and be in an Islamic environment for whatever reasons, just to try to protect themselves from the different trials and whatnot that are so common here, or just to get away from their own communities and environments that they deemed to be unhealthy for them. A lot of people would find different places abroad, and they would post up. Some would just go just for a short period of time just to learn. Some would go and try to find jobs. So the thing about it is some would go and not come back.
Mhm.
So I know a lot of different individuals that go into all of those categories. So but for me, I didn't really know what to expect. I had a friend of mine who was he was a professor. He's retired now, but he was a professor, and he had connections to the international schools abroad that were looking to hire English teachers to work in the schools abroad. And so, he had built this incredible network, and he was sending, primarily, but not exclusively, but primarily a lot of African American teachers to go abroad to teach English in the international schools. And so because he had this network, he had, people over there that I could contact and get in touch with when I told him that I wanted to go, I wanted to go abroad. So I was able to kind of find some individuals who had been there, and I sort of made my way from there because there were people from the States who had been there for some years, who kind of knew how to move around. And that's really how it started.
Okay. Wow. That's man. That's an and the journey continues, by the way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
All right.
When you went to Egypt, let me see, how do I formulate this question? Um, you spoke about getting away from certain experiences or traumas here in the States, right?
Right.
How did that turn out in Egypt for you?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. So it was so I remember vividly, right, when I when I alerted my family and the people that I cared about that I was going to Egypt. And it should be, I think the second Gulf War had just started,
Mm.
right? So people were like, they were like, "You're going where?" They were like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, is it safe? Is it, I'll get all these questions. And I'm like, in my mind back then, I'm like, do you realize that the communities that I grew up with are not safe? Do you realize how unsafe the places that I grew up in? And do you realize that? So you think I'm worried about, and especially because I had already did my due diligence and I kind of knew, what to expect. And I just wasn't necessarily buying into a lot of what we're sold about other people. You know, everybody is othered in the US. And sometimes we got to be careful as Black and brown folks about othering ourselves somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Right.
We tend to be that way.
Right.
So I understood the concerns that people had, but I took it with a grain of salt, and I'm glad I did. And then I went. So once I got there, the floodgates just opened up. Like, I really didn't know how long I was gonna stay. I bought a one-way ticket, and I told my family, I said, listen, I'll go, and if I don't like it, I'm coming back. I just don't know when. Right. So if I need to come back in a week, I'll come back in a week. If I need to come back in 2 weeks, I'll come back, whatever. Well, I'm just gonna see. So once I got there, like I said, the floodgates just opened up. I met people who provided me with so many different opportunities, and like just in terms of like my living arrangements that I had set up before I went, completely changed, like drastically, like almost as soon as I got off the plane. And so I was expecting to pay something significantly higher. Ended up paying something significantly lower. Could have never anticipated that, right? And so then that situation, I met some people who had been there for a while. They were from London. They were from England, and they were just very, very gracious, like and just helping me to understand, because we were all tied to this one learning center, this one institute. It was an Arabic learning institute, basically, and it was an Arabic learning center for foreigners. That's basically what it was. And we all were kind of drawn there. Although I had other connections, like I said, like my friend who was, who had placed people over there already, to teach English and some of the international schools. So I had that as another way, but I wanted to go there and I wanted to learn Arabic. So when I got there, that's really how I met the first person who helped to point me in the right direction and things like that. So eventually I ended up getting married. I ended up having three children. They were all born in Egypt. And they are 18. My three boys, they're 18. He's a freshman in college. I got a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school, and I got a 13-year-old who's in 7th grade. But they were all born in Cairo. And their mom is she's Nubian, Egyptian, from Nuba is the actual name of the tribe that she's from. And there are about 40 or so different Nubian tribes, and she's from a tribe called Abu Simbel, which is a very famous Nubian tribe. It's famous for a lot of different reasons. Like there's a UNESCO World Heritage Site named after Abu Simbel, and this is her family. This is like her lineage and whatnot. And so, I think it's important to say that she's Black. It's important to say that, apparently, right? Like, because and so right. when we think about ancient Egypt, you cannot separate ancient Egypt from Nuba. You can't. You cannot separate. You can't look at ancient Egypt and all of the Egyptian dynasty and exclude Nuba. You can't do it. They try, but you can't. There's a Nubian museum in Aswan in Egypt that puts it all into context. So if you look up the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Abu Simbel, it tells you specifically why it's a World Heritage Site and who the people were and who those people are still exist today, right in Egypt. And they are as Black as you and I. They come from, they all shades of Black, all shades, really dark to really light to brown, every shade, like just, and it's important to say that because there are all of these misconceptions about, who the ancient Egyptians were or what,
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to go back a little bit to your background and your experiences. You talked a little bit about your experiences in Waterbury and the deindustrialization that was happening when you were a young person. Can you tell us a little bit about dirty water and then your family's experience during the deindustrialization, uh, I guess phase or years or era.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, it would, all would apply.
Yeah.
But so dirty water is something that some local hip hop artists in Waterbury coined the term, dirty water to um, really effectively describe the city,
Mm,
you know, and in terms of like the corruption, the political corruption is like off the charts historically. They've been, you've the city of Waterbury, the governance structures in Waterbury have been dealing with high levels of corruption from the city hall, the mayor's office, across all levels of government for a long time,
mm,
over a century that I know of. And so you know um when I was in high school, uh the mayor at the time was, the sitting mayor was indicted, uh arrested, indicted, arrested, and convicted for
mm.
graft, right? So, there all of this, like, I guess underhanded deals or whatever it was, you
Wow.
know. But and then, like, not even 10 years later, the next sitting mayor, this another sitting mayor, indicted, arrested, convicted for similar things and worse. I won't even talk about it, but you can Google it and you'll see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, worse. It's terrible. It's terrible. Right. And so, like, it was an investigation that the initial investigation was looking into, like, just the corruption, because it's just like, if you look, it's probably always there, I guess. And so they were looking for that, and then they found some other stuff. And then,
Mm,
they but and then, like, other officials, like, across our governance structure, indicted and investigated, and for all kinds of corruption. And so, it trickled down, of course,
mm,
when your leadership and whatnot is corrupt. And then, and it just, I mean, what do you expect people at the bottom, who live in poverty, what do you expect them to do? What do you expect them to do, right? As all the jobs are being offshored,
mm,
you're divesting from the communities and the neighborhoods. Like, I grew up in a time, like, I'm old enough to remember a time when, we had a lot of, like, public, um, you know, uh, like, the boys club was, I mean, for the most part, it was free, I guess,
mhm,
and it was like, the summer jobs and whatnot, and the summer camps for the kids and all of this stuff. And then they would, pay the high school kids, and the college kids who would come home for the summer. You had all these opportunities. You would go on field trips. You would go, you had all these after school things, and you had all of these really healthy cultural things that were keeping kids busy and keeping
mhm,
them creative and keeping them, keeping their mind active. And then, all of this stuff is gutted. It becomes gutted as I get older. They
mm,
don't exist. So if you don't have the money to send your kid to the boys club, or if you can't afford
mhm,
to pay for your kid to get a musical instrument, or to play a musical instrument, or to, hone his or her art skills, if you can't afford to do that, then what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? Right? People are going to find ways to get money. People are going to find things to do with their time, right? Especially, folks who have been historically marginalized, and so you get what you get. But dirty water, sort of exemplified the kinds of the kinds of environments that we found ourselves in. But I like to start from the top. I like to
mhm,
start from, the mayor's office, and across that line, because that's where a lot of the corruption, that's where it was. And so, it's easy to nitpick, and it's like you pick the low hanging fruit to start with, the poor kids from the poor neighborhoods. That's low hanging fruit. That's
mhm,
easy. you know you know um So yeah, dirty water was a very accurate way to describe the city.
As I reflect on your story, I think about my own, and to come from Saginaw, Michigan, where similarly, not brass, but we were known for automotive industries, automobile plants. We made in my hometown, we made gears. You know, we were famous for gears. World War II, we were known for making bullets. You know, all these kinds of things. So what happens? You're right. You know, if the sociologists were way ahead on this. You know, when work disappears, you know, and several others who talk about you know, when the tax base goes, when social support structures go, what remains? You know, people got to eat, right? And then, you know, in some of our work, we look at what happens to schools, you know, in this, you know, when everything else goes away. So in my hometown, Saginaw is known as Sag Nasty. You know, and in some of our recent work, we took the gears, you know, no, and even our minor hockey league team is known as Saginaw Gears. But in some of our recent work, we started calling Saginaw G City because it's known for the gears. But now, just like Waterbury, the G is for gangsters. It's Gangster City because now, you know, the neighborhoods have fallen, a lot have fallen into disarray, urban blight, and all these kinds of things. So, you know, it takes on another connotation. So, you know, I thought it was really interesting how you talked about the evolution of not only your life, but coming up, you know, now get this, amongst deindustrialization, amongst the evolution of hip hop and the rise of hip hop, which you already talked about. So I won't necessarily go into the hip hop question because we had a question on there, but I think you addressed it adequately. In your list, I'm going to just so you know, I'm going to ask a little bit about the migration piece because now this overlaps some of our work. And some of our work, we looked at migration in terms of Black folks who came from the South. Many of them had teaching education, you know, like education careers in the North, and then many of them moved back South again. You know, so we're also investigating migration. So what we want to know from you is, can you discuss the Great Migration? You know, through your take, and you know, I know you're looking along the sort of the North Carolina up the East Coast pathway, where we were looking sort of Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, up towards Detroit, Saginaw, Flint type of. But there's a lot of similarities. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Great Migration and also why many Blacks want to return to the South? Because many people wonder, like, you know, you migrated once to get away from all of that in the South. Why do you want to go back?
That's a really good question. So I think it's important. Like, if it's redundant, just cut me off. But I think that, you know, it's important to contextualize what the Great Migration means for us today, right? Because, you know, it's like this 60-year period between 1910 and 1970 where you know, like, you have this mass exodus of Black folks out of Jim Crow South, right? Like, this is no different than any migration story in U.S. history. You know, people fleeing terror and oppression, etc. This is what the Great Migration was. It was Black people in the South who couldn't get jobs, who were being terrorized by Jim Crow and the oppressions of Jim Crow, looking for other opportunities and looking to maintain whatever dignity they had left, and they were looking to go somewhere else. And you know, it just so happened the stars, I don't know, you know, it just so happened that as the Industrial Revolution was happening across, you know, other parts of the world, particularly Germany and the UK, the US understood that they had to step on the gas, or economically they would be left behind. So you have this built-in workforce in the US. Let's not pretend the Black Americans were the workforce in the US for several hundred years. They were the workforce in the US, right? So now you have this opportunity to plug into, you can take this workforce and plug it into the machine. You just have to have the machines ready. So the machines were ready across Michigan, across Chicago, across New York City, across the West Coast. So now, almost overnight, the United States is competing and outdoing the other industrial manufacturing giants across the world, like almost overnight, because you plugged in this this workforce, this Black workforce. So when we talk about Black folks building the country, that's not metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
And there's layers to that, right? Because we're not just talking about slavery, even in terms of the modern economy, which is really premised on the Industrial Revolution, what the Industrial Revolution meant in terms of shifting from the planter's economy to the industrial economy. And then not just that, but like the period in between where the United States almost crumbled through the Civil War, but then to a short period of time later to lead the world. We need to talk about that more. So the period of the Great Migration, like I said, this six decade period, on top of economically what it does for the U.S., it also did something for, like the social construction of the country. So places like Chicago, all of a sudden, it blackened people. I don't, people have problem with that term. I don't, but it blackened places like Chicago, Detroit, New York City. They were blackened by, this mass movement. And so, like in the case of my own family specifically, and it's interesting that you mentioned the routes, because so like there's a reason, like, so there's a lot of like reasoning why people from certain southern states ended up in certain places, right? So like people on the East Coast, whether like the Northeast corridor going up from, say, Washington, D.C., Philly, Baltimore, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, like people from that Northeast corridor tended to come from Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, because it was a straight shot. Right. And the railways were not as sophisticated as they are now. You know what I mean? So, and then the people from Chicago and Detroit, they came from places like Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, because it was a straight shot, right? And then people out west, they came from places like Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi as well, because it was straight shots. And so, but there's a lot of exceptions to that too. But in general, this is how the Great Migration was formatted, because a lot of it had to do with like the sophistication of the roadways and the transportation opportunities weren't as sophisticated then as they are now. So a lot of it had to do with that. But in its essence, we're all Southerners, all Black Americans. We're all Southerners. You know what I mean? We are all Southerners. Like I don't care if you're from Chicago or New York City. You Southern. Southerners raised you. We were raised by Southerners. We Southerners. They instilled certain Southern values in us, and they tried their hardest to get us to, to be, to live accordingly. But, we, the products of environment, and just trying to, make it all make sense. Okay. So now when we talk about my family specifically, my great grandfather, whose name was, we called him Sonny Man. Sonny Man, right? And so that's how, from what I was told, that's how I ended up getting that nickname, Manny. It went from Sonny Man to Little Man to Manny, and then, it just morphed into all of these names over time. So Manny just stuck. But apparently I resembled my great-grandfather, who left North Carolina in 1940. He left North Carolina. And what's important about 1940 is it was like sort of like the height of the lynching epidemic. There was a really big lynching case that happened in Lewisburg, North Carolina, where my family is from. It's a very big international lynching story that happened in Lewisburg, right? So the NAACP and all of these other media outlets, and NAACP was pretty big back then too, right? So they were big and they had a lot of influence, right? And so, and so he leaves at that time, and he goes to New York City, goes to Harlem, right? Moves to Harlem, he works as a bus driver, leading up until, he passes away. So, which was in 1955. So, so I talk about a little bit about him and, his life in the book. And then I guess 23 years after he left. His daughter, which is my grandmother, leaves North Carolina and comes to Connecticut. And, my mom is part of that. My grandmother's 7 youngest kids at the time. My my grandparents had 15 children. So but at this time when my grandmother is migrating, she's only 7 of them live with her, and they're all girls. The rest of them were older, and they had already were out and started families and whatnot. And a lot of them had already came up north. A lot of my older uncles and aunts had already came up north and got jobs. And, and they were the ones who really sent back for my grandmother and her other kids. My grandfather, my mother's father, they had separated. He goes to New York City, he goes to Brooklyn, and my grandmother goes to Connecticut. So I come out of that, that generation of that second wave of migration with my mom. And 10 years later, my mom was 9 when she left. 10 years later, I'm born. I come into the world. That's really I'll stop there and let you ask some questions.
Well, and I'll say this as you're talking, because interestingly enough, my family came from Alabama up to Saginaw, and that's where I was born. And there was always, it's funny, it's always this connection, just like you mentioned, the train, the railways, the highways, just like in a body, just like veins, we're you just stay so connected to the body and the family. The family is connected even across geographic space. So is what you just said made me sort of think about that, because eventually I would do the reverse and I would go to college in Alabama. I made the decision to go back home to the South for a huge part of my development and my own education to an HBCU, much like I think we share that too. We also share that connection. I'll take this time and also mention, for those listening and watching, if you want more on some of the things we're talking about, we don't have time to get into all of them here. Of course, you want to get the book, Heirs of the Great Migration, on Amazon, and we'll talk about later where you can get that book. Dr. Wright mentioned in his book, The Warmth of Other Suns, Isabella Wilkerson, When Work Disappears. You want to learn more about that from, who's my man? I'm thinking sociologist, William Julius Wilson. Race Matters, Cornell West. Democracy Matters, Cornell West. Beecham and McCrae, Cultural Collision and Collusion. We talked a little bit about that, and there are several other works, but all those kind of texts undergird and support the conversation that we're having now. And Yulitza, you can go back and we can work together in terms of linking all of those texts. So if you're watching this, folks, you'll be able to get links on all of those books and more, depending on where we go next with the conversation.
As you're speaking, I actually am thinking my own migration, because my dad came here for a job from Puerto Rico. And so he came over, and then he brought us. And then my aunt came with my uncle, with my cousins. And then other cousins that were living in New York City moved to Jersey at that time, to New Jersey. And so we developed like our own little community in New Jersey from just my dad migrating from Puerto Rico to New Jersey for a job. So we just, have expanded and then just grown. And now all of us have kids. So now we're like, we're like a little community, and now we're like a tribe, So, so it's really interesting to look at that and how we've changed and how we end up where we are because of the decisions that our ancestors have made along the way.
I want to know from you, and I'm going to your background as a scholar and as a teacher. How do you find the balance when discussing race? Because the in-house conversation that we have, kind of like the conversation we're having now, can have the depth, the nuance, historical references, and doesn't need additional explanation. You just said it. If you know, you know. Now, on the other hand, in more public discussions, then it seems like the conversation has to be more tailored to the audience. In other words, you can't always go as hard as you want to go in certain places. So for you, as a, like I said, as a scholar, as a teacher, how do you navigate these realities because on the one hand, I'm in spaces where, I feel like I need to go harder. But if I do, I know that I'm either going to get pushback, somebody's not going to understand, and I'm not going to accomplish the goal that I'm trying to accomplish. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me see. Let me see if this answers your question. So I was recently a part of. This is like kind of the academic response to your question, but it's not going to be all of that, all academic. But I was recently a part of a special issue that's coming out in QSE, and
Mm-hmm.
it's called Beyond. It's the theme of the special issue was Beyond the White Gaze. Right? And the idea of beyond the white gaze, I was invited to be a part of it, and I was thrilled to be a part of it. So, and finally it's about to come out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the idea of the white gaze, a lot of it stemmed from the work with Toni Morrison talking about, how she would write for she could tell when someone's speaking to her as a Black person, or when they're speaking to about Black people to other people other than to white people, right? And she could tell when a Black author is speaking to white people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how she framed it. She said, because they would explain things that they wouldn't necessarily have to explain to me if they were talking to me.
Right.
Right. So and from that, there's also this expectation that we've sort of been indoctrinated with, I guess, that suggests that we always need to be mindful of speaking to white people when we speak. For example, Toni Morrison was she had an interview with I believe the lady that was interviewing her was from Australia or New Zealand, one or the other, somewhere down below, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady asked her, she said, when are you going to ever write books about or for white people or something like that? And Toni Morrison, like, is like that elderly Black aunt that we all have, like, had this way of, like, just checking this woman so strong. She said, you would never ask a white author to do what you just asked me. You don't even realize how disrespectful it is that you said what you said, because you would never ask a white author to write for Black people. You would never do that, but you feel the need to do this for me. So I'm saying all that to say that little instance right there lets us know how unconditional, like how unconsciously we do this, right? We speak in a way that we're trying to almost prove something to white people, right? Or like get their approval or get their acceptance. The point is, okay, maybe that's a stretch, and maybe some people might disagree with that. But my point, though, is that race is so fundamental to everything we do that at whatever point we're not in a position, we don't have the privilege to act like we can take timeouts, because it follows us everywhere we go. It is fundamental to how this, and so a lot of times what happens as academics, right? We tend to, because we're trained by people, we're trained in the canons that inform our learning. All of this stuff is Eurocentric. It's all European thought, and so we look for ways to try to critique it and problematize it, because it should be, right? Because if we take it for what it's worth, it's proven to be harmful to us. And so for me, I don't know if I'm necessarily looking for an opportunity to turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the thing to do. I think that I think the best generations amongst us were the civil rights generations. And I don't think they ever turned it off.
Mhm.
They turned it up. So we can't. So I'm not the best person to ask that question.
Your comments remind me of was it Baldwin? Was it James Baldwin? They asked him about the Negro problem in America,
Yeah.
uh, and he said it ain't no Negro problem. What you talking about?
Right.
It's a problem. You got the problem.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
know,
I can't make your problem my problem. You know what I
right?
mean? Like this is your problem. It's not mine. I'm not.
But that's what.
I, go
But
ahead. Go ahead.
that's why Baldwin was masterful
Hmm.
at articulating Black rage in ways that, now look, in his own way, he was doing it, articulating Black rage in a way that it didn't appeal to the white masses, but it came off in a way that was palatable because of the way that he phrased it. So, so now I'm wondering, wow, is it about the language to get across to because he's cutting like a knife. I mean, he's cutting debates, interviews, you name it. He's doing his thing, but in ways is almost, I mean, using the master's tools to a certain extent. And then I'll use your inflection, I'll use your language, I'll use all of that in the service of my agenda then,
Hmm.
which is essentially Black liberation.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, Baldwin was masterful, and everything that he left us in terms of like his critiques and his analysis. I mean, they're so relevant today, right? And then it's like, okay, so we wasted basically 30 years, and we decided not to do nothing with this information, right? We decide. So I mean, and that's the point, though. That's the point, right? He left us with so much. Same with all of those civil rights giants. They left us with so much. Martin Luther King told us, he said, the biggest threat to, I'm paraphrasing, the biggest threat to the Negro getting freedom is the white liberal, like something like that. What he said.
Mhm.
Man, you know how seething that is? You know how right? Like, come on, let's deal with that. Let's just take,
Right.
let's just push everything MLK said to the side, and let's deal with that. Let's deal with these people today. The people he said was the biggest interference or the biggest problem. Oh man,
Yeah.
because it still resonates today. It's still today.
Yep. And now the double irony is things like the real critical race theory aims at attacking just as what you're saying. The critique of liberalism, which is embedded as one of the tenets of critical race theory, actually says, hey, yeah, you're right. As a matter of methodology and perspective and framework, we need to do just that. But now get this, but again, what's more palatable? We don't hear that quote from Dr. King. We don't hear the mountaintop speech. We don't hear I may not get there with you. What we hear is I have a dream. And then the worst part about that is we only get the one segment of I have a dream. we get that same phrase that gets used over and over again up in the text. He also says, we can't take the pill of gradualism.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Earlier in the same speech, we ignore all this other stuff he says. He tells you why we came there. Right. We came to cash a check.
Get our check. We came to get our checks.
Yeah, we came to get this money.
I didn't hear that until I was a full-blown adult.
Me too. Right? I didn't really hear him till then.
Wow.
Oh man, yeah. Now I think we'll talk about the book a little bit before we get out of here.
Okay.
Absolutely. So your marketing, the video, the merchandise is amazing. So how did you, how did you make that happen? What was your plan? What was your vision for that?
So I have a MBA, I have a business degree, and I have a master's in business administration that since I've been doing at leadership, I haven't used much. But I ran a business before, and I have done some entrepreneurial things in my past. And so I'm always I have the mindset for it. And so I took the opportunity to publish the book, and use that skill set to generate a marketing campaign because, right, one of the things that really frustrates me about academia is that is that we have this peer review process that in terms of like how we get published and things like that, which theoretically is good. I mean, conceptually is good, it's fair. Like you want to make sure that the people who are on your level can help you see things that you don't see. And then help you, enlighten you about things that you just might not be aware of. So it's good in that sense. But the other part of the peer review process is that we have to be honest. When this came about, like, they didn't have us in mind. We weren't the peers that they were talking about. We black brown folks, we weren't part of this initial, right. And so it shows up in a lot of ways, when our experience, like, we might be peers in terms of the academic institutions that we graduated from or where we teach at, but we're not peers in terms of how we grew up, how we see the world, our lived experiences. We're not peers in that way. And this shows up when you try to publish an article and you get, these pushbacks that have nothing to do, like you're pushing back about an analysis that I'm making based on something that I lived, right? And so that becomes the problematic aspect of the peer review discourse, right? And I know people are going to be like, "Who the hell does he think he is?" And that's fine.
No. You're right.
I know.
You're right. I remember years ago, man, in 03, 04, when we first tried to insert talking about hip hop in education, the origins of hip hop education. Nobody wanted to publish it. I mean, is this academic? I mean, hip hop's not scholarly, and we just got rejected. And then this one journal, an online journal, years ago, said, we're gonna give it a shot because that's what's happening in schools right now. We're ignoring the reality again, like you said, the lived reality of what's happening in schools. So they published it, and from that, we just went on and eventually we got a publisher who said, you know what, this is where things are going. And from that point, the whole hip hop education as a respected area of the scholarship started to emerge. And even today, it's not there yet. It's still it still gets pushed back.
Right. So what I wanted to do with the book was, I said, I'm not interested in like having to go through this weight game with someone, because first of all, this is just my experience. This is my life. This is the life of my family, and I don't necessarily need, and I'm not interested, rather, right? And having someone tell me that maybe I should take this out, or maybe you should consider rethink. I didn't want to have to do that, and plus I didn't want to wait. So I said, okay. So that's why I self-published, and because I was able to control the narrative, I was able to control what I wanted to put in there. Like, I didn't want to have someone put doubt in my head about, hey, do you think maybe you should reconsider this? I didn't have to deal with that. And there are pros and cons to that. Like, some of the cons are, if you don't have a publisher, you don't have that machine behind you, you don't have that, their network and whatnot. So I had to create one. And so, in creating one, and I like to say, building the plane while flying it. I had like all of the pieces around me. Like, I have people who are videographers, professional videographers. I have professional musicians who, because all that music is original.
Wow.
Right? It's all original. That none of that is, those are friends of mine who gave me the music behind all of these videos. Wow. And the videographer is a friend of mine. So I came with the ideas, and they said, okay, let's do it. So we're doing it. So ultimately what's going to happen is that 10-minute trailer that you saw is gonna turn into a documentary, and eventually it's gonna turn into a docuseries, and eventually that docuseries is gonna turn into a movie. I don't care if I have to fund it myself.
Right.
I don't care if I have to start a GoFundMe page, which I probably will, and I'll do it myself, because I get it. You're not gonna tell me that I can't do it. I've been told, Dr. I've been told I can't do something all my life. If I would have listened, I would be sitting here right now.
Right.
My guidance counselor in high school told me, my guidance counselor in high school, I was 17 years old. She looked me dead in the face and said, by the time you're 21 years old, you're going to have a criminal record as long as your arm if you're not dead.
Wow.
Think about that, man. Think about that. So, I can say it with a smile on my face today, but the point is, I'm not, you can't tell me that I can't do something. You can, but okay, all right, well, just let's see.
Right. I mean, that's what it takes for trailblazers, pioneers, entrepreneurs. I think you're right. I think that's the mindset that you have to take. And for somebody who's published several books, when I saw what you were doing, I'm sitting there looking at that like publishers don't even do this. People who've published the material don't push your stuff out like that. They've got this sort of mindset on, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. That's it. That's all you're getting out of us. And then the worst part is you end up promoting your own stuff anyway.
Right.
Just the same thing happens.
Right. And they take a bigger piece of whatever you do sell.
Right.
Yep. Let's not forget about that.
Man, it's a hip hop contract. It's that's what you're signing.
Yeah.
Where can you share with our viewers the website so that they're able to see the video?
Okay, yeah. So I have a YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel is author James. Yeah, is it? Yeah, I think it's author James Wright. And if you just put it, if you go to YouTube and you type in Heirs of the Great Migration, I think I have 7 videos on my YouTube channel. One is the book launch that consists of Doctors Muhammad Khalifa and Dr. Erba Dakota, who were part of the book launch. And then there's a 10-minute video trailer that sort of like is a synopsis of the book. And it's very entertaining. And I got, I don't know, maybe like 30,000, 40, close to 40,000 views on that video trailer just in a couple of months. So, and then I have a few other things on my YouTube channel. And also my website, which is drjameswright.com.
Yep. We got it we put it in the chat.
Okay, yeah. So you can find where to buy the book and also where to find the website, the YouTube videos.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I post those on YouTube also and on the podcast episode. Last question. So what should people take away? Actually, second to last question. What should people take away from this book?
One thing is I think that the way I frame Generation X, Black American Generation X, as the first generation of Black Americans with all of the rights under the U.S. Constitution. People tend to think that, the oppression of Blacks was so long ago. But really, Black folks didn't get their rights until the Civil Rights Movement. That's when, because my mother was born under Jim Crow. She was born, right? My grandma, and so everybody that preceded them were either born under Jim Crow or enslavement, right? And so the Generation X is the first generation of Black. I'm the first generation. I'm the first Black American in my family to have all of the rights under the U.S. Constitution. That's significant. That's number one. The other thing I think is when we look at, the state of Black education, right, and the indifference, the societal indifference of the state of Black education. It is problematic on so many ways, like the indifference of Black education, the crisis, the indifference of the killing of Black kids in the streets, of whether it's amongst themselves or through the hands of the police. The general indifference is problematic right? And so one of the things that we need to really understand through this book, I think, is that number one, that the most important generation, in my opinion, of Blacks in US history are the civil rights generations, right? These are the most important, most significant Black people in US history, in my opinion. You know what is so significant about them is that they were all products of segregated schools.
Mm.
They were all products of educators who looked like them, who understood them, who believed in them, who knew how to protect them from the society that they were going to grow up in. And these people went on to change the world. So if we don't start talking about the importance and stop apologizing for this, of Black people being responsible for Black education, we don't need to apologize for that. We have 70 years of what, to tell us that it's not working. But we have 100 years before that to show us that it could work, because it did. We had a 100-year institution of Black education from 1865 to 1964, roughly. We had a 100-year institution of Black education, and it produced the best Black Americans in US history, in my opinion. 70 years removed from that model, we're in dire straits. We're on the brink of extinction. As Black folks, we can't apologize to nobody about that. We need our kids to be in schools with people who love them, who care about them, and who know how to deal with them, who believe in them, and who's not, feeling sorry for them and pushing them along.
Mhm.
Your comments maybe also think about the living legacy of what you just talked about, not for K-12, but the HBCUs are still around to this day. Many of them built by slaves themselves. Again, you've attended, I've attended, and part of the reason I made that choice was, coming out of school in the North, in the so-called integrated North. I'm also part of Generation X. I made a conscious decision to say, I want to go to school back down South in an environment where, they're like, well, but you're going to be in Montgomery. You're going to be in the heart of the South, the heart of Dixie. I said, yes, but I'm going to be in my own space. I'm going to be, so my experience was being on the campus where, a lot of the faculty was Black, the president is Black, in a Black community, the students were majority Black. And, for those out there who would say, well, isn't that racist? Well, we don't say that. We don't say that when it's a majority white institution. How can it be racist? Or are you saying that it only applies when it's a predominantly Black or predominantly Latin serving?
What I think is racist is the fact that I think it's safe to assume that if white kids were in schools being run by Black and Latino teachers and they were failing them disproportionately, white folks would be in the streets. If white kids in the suburbs were shooting each other, killing each other, white people would be in the streets. If police was going around knocking white boys upside the head and dragging white girls across the street on their faces, white people would be in the streets. Where are these white folks when it comes to what's happening to us? Where are they? You ask me if me wanting to be responsible for my community is racist? Because you clearly don't want to be responsible for that. You don't have nothing to say. You have something to say now that I say that we want to take them back. Let us have them. Thank you. We're good. We'll take them. That's racist? You had them for 70 years. Look at it. Look at our condition.
And that's that look, and that's the irony. I mean, now we can say, it's Dr. King, in his scathing critique of liberalism at that particular moment has given way to the 21st century now of the critique of this reactionary sort of wing of politics that now wants to erase everything. It's already, I mean, like you just said, 70 years, we scraped by. It was bad enough. But now we want to ban your books. We want to ban your content. We want to ban Black history. We're going to finish the job.
Yeah, and you know what? You know what's interesting about you bringing up the HBCUs? Many of our kids can't even get there. You got to get through K through 12 to get to the HBCU.
Right.
We can't even get there. So if you strengthen the kid, it's really backwards, right? Our K through 12 need to be historically Black. Like, seriously, because by the time you get out of high school, you would have a lot of the requisite tools to go to a PWI, maybe, arguably, right? But if you are being told at the youngest of ages, shown that you're not capable, or that you're not you're not cut out for it, right? If you're being shown that and told that directly and indirectly, right? We're at those formative years, those formative ages, right? It's difficult to imagine that they're going to get to a point where they can even get into an HBCU.
Yeah, man. And funny enough, in the Cultural Collusion and Collision book from 2011, we actually talk about the first chapter. We actually talk about the history of Blacks and Black education. One of the things we mention is, and funny enough, we kind of do what you're saying. We actually look at three things in each historical era. We look at slavery, we look at segregation, we look at the movement to the urban north, and we look at contemporary life right now. In each space of history, we look at what's happening in society, what's happening in education, what's happening musically in every single era. And the subheading of every single one is the name of a song. And the name of the song for the current era is Get Rich or Die Trying. And in that particular segment of the book, we actually talk about the lessons from what we learned from Black educators in the pre-Brown era, right? We talk about those values, and then we transpose those values onto the 21st century educators and say, here's what we need to be doing. Because one, we don't have enough Black teachers right now. So guess what? Teacher, whatever your ethnicity, race, ethnicity, whatever identity space is, this is what we need, because many of you are in marginalized communities, forgotten communities. These are the kind of values that you're going to need, and these are the kind of things that you're going to need to do to help our kids. And by helping our kids, we can help all kids, because you don't know where the next entrepreneur, you don't know where the next Dr. King is going to come from. You don't know where the next, brilliant idea, it could be over there in the hood. But if we don't nurture that child in that particular space, then like you said, they will never get a chance to come out of that space and emerge and become what it is they're meant to be.
This is one thing you just made me think of this, right? One of the hip hop is one of the biggest indictments on the United States. How so? Because you have, let's take Jay-Z, and let's take Tupac, right? All right. Let's start with Jay-Z. I don't think Jay-Z graduated high school. I don't think he did, right? Can anybody overstate the brilliance of this guy, right? Can we overstate the brilliance of Jay-Z? Like, intellectually, can we overstate some of the absolute brilliance of some of the hip hop artists, many of whom would have never gotten a platform to communicate their brilliance to the world? He's communicating to the world, right? Someone who, by all accounts, would have been a failure in school, or by all accounts, she said, that's not nice. So by all accounts, would have been a failure in school, right? And so, like that's why I say I think hip hop is one of the biggest indictments against us, because you have this clear legacy of genius throughout the 50 years of hip hop that shows up, right? And so much to the extent that it creates an international wave, right? And these same individuals are marginalized in schools, pushed out of schools. Many of them have never even finished school. It's a big, major indictment on our country and on our school system.
What about Tupac?
I mean, the same. I mean, the thing with Pac, the thing about Pac, I mean, his mom was a revolutionary, right? So, and she put him in positions to where he was, like he went to like the School of Performing Arts in Baltimore. You know what I mean? But school isn't where he got his consciousness. Like his intelligence didn't come from school. It came from his mama. It came from his mama and the people that she had him around. And they were revolutionaries, like for real. And so, but again, America's not interested, has proven to us, this isn't a conspiracy. They've proven this, that they're not interested in our genius. They're not interested in honing our genius. They've proven that for whatever reason. We don't even need to speculate about why, right? Like the fact of the matter is that they've proven that's not something that they're interested in. So, but it becomes an indictment on them before the whole world when someone like Tupac emerges, or someone like, Jay-Z emerges, and you know what I mean, and are able to articulate, so much of what's going on socially, politically, and you know what I mean? And then they coming from the poorest, most divested environments. The other thing too, right? So Tupac is, and this is the last thing I'll say, but Tupac is also a product of the Great Migration as well. His mom, Feeney, is from North Carolina. She's from Lumberton, North Carolina. She left Lumberton, North Carolina in I think it was 58. And they moved to New York City, they moved to Harlem. And so when you think about, like I said, all of us, all the Black Americans are products of the Great Migration. And so his mom and all his family, his ancestral line through his family is in North Carolina, through his mom. So, all of these, we're all connected by this. We're all affected by this,
Last question. Where can we buy your book?
Okay, so you can buy the book on Amazon.com. Just if you type in Heirs of the Great Migration, Dr. James Wright, it'll populate. Also, if you go to my website, drjameswright.com, it'll also there's a link there that you can buy it as well. So yeah, those two places.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Wright, we're going to let you get out of here, man. Is there anything you have? Like I said, we can let you get one of the last words here. What do you have coming up next? What are you working on? Where will you be?
So there's actually I'm doing some book signings coming up. I have one that has just been confirmed actually today. It was confirmed this morning. So June 9th and June 10th, I'll be in my hometown in Waterbury, Connecticut. June 9th, which is a Friday, I'll be talking to some high school students back in my my old high school, and just talking to some students and some teachers about my experiences and whatnot. And then the next day, June 10th, which is a Saturday, I'll be at I don't know where yet, but it'll be somewhere downtown Waterbury, doing book signing and a talk about the book. The following week, June 17th, I'll be in Atlanta for there's a Juneteenth festival, and I'll have a vending booth set up with the merch and the books in Atlanta for 3 days. So it'll be June 17th, 18th, and 19th. I think it's 16th, 17th, and 18th, something like that. That Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I'll be in Atlanta, and then there are a bunch of other things coming up that are not verified yet, but that
Mhm.
are on the horizon.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, look, again, thank you for your time. We're going to certainly promote you. Like I said, it'll be on this podcast. We're also supporting you on our Facebook page, also known as Equitable Minds. So make sure everybody out there check out the Facebook page. It'll be updated with a lot of this material. Um, and one more time, we want to thank Dr. Wright for just a fabulous conversation. Man, we just appreciate you so much. And like, I want to go ahead and get you scheduled right now. So we want to make sure you come back here again when the next book comes out.
Okay, you got it, man. Floyd, all you got to do is say the word.
Documentary for the
Yeah,
documentary.
absolutely. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's
Well,
coming.
look, we certainly need to talk about you too, man, because I think it's a greater story. We need to connect with you on this, on some more work on the migration, because, like I said, we're working over here too on a similar kind of story. So, you know, we'll keep the conversation going.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All
I
right,
appreciate it. Thanks,
Thank you
thanks
so
for having
much.
me. Thank
all
you.
right, brother.
All
Take
right.
care, man.
Have a good one.